everyone. Welcome back to the Good Boys Guide, Part 3. So, there's a quick update that I'd like to announce. I have officially made the project entirely free to view on my Substack. Before I was putting it up for paying subscribers. However, I came to the realization that I just want to be able to connect with more people, that I want to put my work out there so it can be seen. Maybe it's a rookie mistake on my part because I'm just actually getting started. This is the first major video project series that I'm doing, so I guess it doesn't make that much sense to start off with monetization. So I want to connect with you guys and get to know you better and get feedback from what you have to say, and I can't do that if I'm withholding the content behind a paywall that you don't know if you're going to enjoy. So I've made it free, and all you have to do is go to my Substack. You don't even have to subscribe, I don't think, to view it. But if you do subscribe, you can be a free subscriber. And you will get emails every time that I make a post. The post will be sent directly to your email, so you can just open it up and view it at your leisure. So, if you want to support me still, please do consider becoming a free subscriber. Definitely check out this video, and leave a like, comment, and subscribe. So, without further ado, I'm kind of just going to get into this. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to do this because I think it becomes a little monotonous when I am reading from the screen constantly. I know I'll take the time to look back up at you guys, at the camera here, to finish the sentence, but I'm constantly going back and forth, and I know that kind of looks a little weird, but I still haven't exactly figured it out yet, and because I'm calling this a podcast, it's more or less for listening's sake. I don't have too much going on the screen here except for me, but I think those who actually want to sit and watch, you'll just have to deal with me going back and forth between my screen for now, because I'm terrible at memorizing scripts. I can't do it for the life of me. I'm just logically focused, and I have to, if I'm going to be talking about something that's not off the top of my head, to balance out these ideas, I have to read it from what I've originally written, because the way for me to think is to write, and I'm just not that good at it on the spot. Maybe I'll get better. So, without further ado, let's get into this. So this is part 3. Part 3 is not one of the chapters of the book, but a part that I wanted to make because I wanted to expand on some of the definitions of the words, of the very key words that we're talking about. So the title of the book is Good Habits, Good Manners, and Good Principles, but the author doesn't really outrightly state what good habits, good manners, and good principles are. He kind of just gives a definition. So I'm going to just start reading from this, and we'll get into it, and I'll cover anything else that comes into my head. So, in the previous chapter, Principles and Habits, the author repeatedly states the importance of developing both good habits and good principles. The author gave a literal definition and a little bit of the history of the words, habit and principle, but he failed to distinguish what made a particular habit good or bad. Perhaps those definitions would become clear later in the book, or perhaps the author intends the reader to know implicitly what he means by good and bad. It seems that the author takes this knowledge for granted. Sorry. I just had that moment in my head. There was an episode of Rick and Morty where Rick, he says to Morty, "Oh, I would hate to take it for granted." And that just popped in my head up. Yep.
Yeah. Really makes you think, huh, Morty? We should never take things for granted. What? I'm just saying, life's short. We shouldn't take things for granted.
Are you saying granite?
Well, yeah.
It's granted, with a D.
I believe the author takes this knowledge for granted, especially since his main usage for his main understanding is based in the Bible. So it is made very clear in the Bible what's good and evil, and the ideas in the Bible back in 1853 when this book was published were pretty well known to most people. So, but the problem with that is that anymore, not many people read the Bible, and not many people are religious, so they can't benefit from the established values that are within the Bible. So, I believe it is necessary to establish a more concise definition of what is meant by good habits and good principles beyond just the foundation of the Bible. As stated in the last chapter, principles are the foundation for which behaviors are created. Where behaviors are enacted. Principles are the foundation for which behaviors are enacted, and habits are formed by repeated behaviors. We have to make certain judgments about what can be considered a good behavior and an evil or a bad behavior. For example, a behavior that is seen as universally bad and which is agreed upon by most humans on Earth is that murdering another person is wrong. Morality is the key to understanding temptations, virtues, vices, integrity, and principles, which, by the way, part 3 is part 3, definitions of temptation, integrity, virtues, good principles, and good habits. To establish a definition for these terms, we first have to recognize that they all have moral implications. Virtue and integrity are inherently good. Vice and temptation are inherently bad. Principles can either be good or bad, depending on the morality of a person, and habits reinforce whatever principles and beliefs are held by that person. Humans have pondered morality for millennia, and there's no way that I could go over the whole history of moral thinking here. There would be volumes and volumes and volumes of books on that, and I don't have the capacity for that anyway. Other people have already done it, so. But suffice it to say, there are certain beliefs and certain habits that leads one either to the development of virtues and integrity, or to temptations and vices. It is safe to say that any belief or behavior that leads one to vices can be considered bad behavior, and any action that embodies virtue is good. Virtues are traits and qualities that represent higher moral standards. The Greeks, particularly Socrates, established what are known... actually, I don't know if Socrates was directly responsible for this. I'll make that note. But around the time of Socrates, the Greeks established what are known as the 5 cardinal virtues, which are wisdom, moderation and temperance, bravery, justice, and piety. I believe, too, there's something known as the 7 virtues, but this is what I came up with in doing my research. These 5 traits supposedly are what helped people to live full and meaningful lives. As is commonly known with Socrates, wisdom and knowledge took precedence over everything. Those virtues were his mantra. Socrates believed that one who had the knowledge of good and bad could only choose to do good. Anyone who was bad or performed evil deeds was somehow unaware that what they were doing was wrong. Of course, this is highly debatable, but it does provide some indication that one who strives to be virtuous does so by doing what is known to be morally right. Virtues, therefore, serve as a means to steer one away from temptations and vices. What Socrates says about knowledge can still apply to today, but I actually have an argument against it. Imagine that you know that you are doing something that is bad for you, say, smoking cigarettes, which many people do. You know that they are bad for your health, yet you choose to smoke them anyway. That means that every time you smoke a cigarette, a conflict is created within you where you believe 2 opposite things to be true. Smoking serves your habits, and if you don't smoke, you'll have withdrawal, which is bad, and something to be avoided. But by avoiding the discomfort of withdrawal, you perpetuate the habit of smoking, which could lead to lung cancer or other serious diseases. The conflict that this creates is called cognitive dissonance, and it has to do with the fact that there is knowledge that the behavior being engaged in is wrong and bad for one's health. When cigarettes were commercialized in the 20th century, no one knew the extent of the damage that they could do, or maybe very few people did, but the common view held by the public was that smoking was fashionable. Not knowing better meant that it wasn't necessarily viewed as a bad thing. But now, we know better. There are warning labels on every single pack of cigarettes that clearly state the harmful effects of smoking. So, despite having knowledge of the harmful effects, why would anyone still consider smoking them? Socrates would say that they don't truly have the knowledge that what they are doing is harmful. Whether it's by denial, or by the fact that the person consuming them isn't sick from them yet, the fact remains that it would be impossible not to understand the danger, unless you were blind, deaf, or dumb. And in that case, you might not even be smoking cigarettes anyway. So, to conclude this example, it could be said that anyone who pursues something that is harmful to their health, both in the short term and in the long term, are captured by vice. And therefore, what they are doing is the opposite of virtuousness. Does that mean that that person is entirely unvirtuous? No, not necessarily. But that also depends on exactly what is being done, or what that person does besides the bad behavior. There's a saying that we all have our vices, and to a degree that's true. But to the degree that one is ruled by their vices determines whether or not they are virtuous, and that would probably dictate whether or not they're a morally good or bad person. But there's a lot of context and a lot of variation. So, and in fact, one could argue that a person who moderates their cigarette smoking is employing the virtue of temperance. But the fact remains that any cigarette smoking is harmful and therefore a completely unvirtuous behavior. It is difficult to always discern what is truly moral, like I said, but in this case I have made the argument that anything that does harm either in the short or the long term is unvirtuous and therefore lacks elaborate moral consideration. And that is the key. If you're going to do something without much consideration, which we talked about, I believe, in either the first or the second part, thoughtless actions can turn into bad behaviors, which can turn into bad habits, which can have all sorts of negative effects on one's life, including the shortening of their life if that bad habit happens to be smoking. So, moving on to integrity. Integrity essentially means a strong base. To be integral is to be an important and necessary part of something. To have integrity means to have a strong moral base, from which there is no deviation, or very little, considering the fact that people can learn and grow. The best example is a person who always follows through with what they say they are going to do, and that's quite a tremendous thing. Not many people actually can do that, whether it's by circumstance or whether it's by personality trait. And they usually do it promptly if they are that kind of person. Integrity includes consistency and therefore reliability. Integrity can be seen as a virtue in itself because it embodies determination, dependability, and reliability, which are all traits that have within them inherently, same word, same meaning, higher moral standards. To be dependable means to hold yourself to something, to hold yourself to a certain standard. Habits and principles that have integrity can therefore be considered virtuous. They serve a higher standard of morals. Habits and principles imbued with integrity therefore help to prevent an individual from succumbing to baseless pleasures, temptations, and vices. We can now finally say that good principles and good habits are formed by striving for higher moral standards, and doing so is virtuous. Repeatedly choosing virtuous actions good habits, allows one to develop an integrity that will help to protect one from temptation and vice. The development of virtue can come from studying ancient philosophy, but the best examples are actually parents, people who lead by example, role models, who act in a virtuous and principled manner. The author uses Bible scripture to aid in the development of good habits and good principles. But besides using quotes from the Bible, the foundations for good principles and good habits are implied. I want to take a look at the Ten Commandments because they are essentially the implied rules that the author is referring to. They are held throughout the Bible since, I believe it's in Exodus, when Moses comes down with them. And they are held by not just Christians, but I believe the Ten Commandments also exist within Judaism, and a type of them, if not the same things, because I think the book of Exodus is also part of the Quran. I'm not as educated or as researched in that, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that the Ten Commandments has some sort of place in all three major religions. So, this is what the author is referring to, that I believe the author is referring to when he says the development of good habits and good principles. So, the commandments are essentially known to all people and are part of the three major religions in the world. They are as follows. Let's go through them. 1. I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have any others before me. 2. Thou shalt not have any other creators or worship idols. 3. Thou shalt not take thy Lord's name in vain. 4. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 5. Honor thy father and mother. 6. Thou shalt not murder. 7. Thou shalt not commit adultery. 8. Thou shalt not steal. 9. Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. And 10. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor. These rules are inherent in the author's beliefs, and he holds these to serve as the key rules that help to create proper principles. Like I said previously, there are some commandments that non-religious people can actually agree with, and that should be upheld, like that of not murdering, not stealing, not cheating or lying, and not being envious of one another. Those rules alone are essentially enough to keep one out of trouble. But those rules alone do not provide the spiritual foundation that all people need in order to live meaningful, full, enriching lives. What does it mean to have a spiritual life? And how does that guide one towards the creation of better principles? Essentially, all people need to have faith in something. They need to have something to believe in, even if that belief is the denial of faith. We all need something to provide us with values and structure. Without some kind of order, everything is chaos, and no one can sustain an existence entirely within chaos, at least not for very long. In many cases, faith is found through religion, and religion has specific rules that give it structure. Though seemingly arbitrary, all order is necessarily arbitrary. That's what gives it structure, clearly defined proportions and boundaries. Boundaries that are also clearly defined and stated in the Bible. Besides the Ten Commandments, we have other rules and laws that help to keep our society civil and orderly. Following our law code can also help us to develop good principles. But again, law code alone does not provide any deeper inner meaning which gives individual life purpose. It is faith and belief that gives life personal meaning, and that faith and belief must be subjected to some sort of analysis of what is considered right and wrong. It is this sense of morality that is implied in the creation of good principles and good habits. There are many ideas and concepts within morality, within the term, the subject, the study of it. But the main idea to know is the idea of seeking the highest value. This is something that I think has been better explained by somebody like Jordan Peterson, but people either love or hate him. So I'm going to try my best to reiterate it in my own kind of way. So, what is of highest value, what somebody values the most, is essentially likened to God, whether you're religious or not. If you're religious, it is God. If you're not, it's something else. But we all have something, or at least we all need something, to have as the highest sense of value. So, and therefore that gives it the highest moral quality, because it is the greatest good, essentially. It is what is considered most important, and to make that decision takes careful consideration. It requires a judgment to be made about what seems to be most meaningful in life, what will give life most meaning, what will entirely fulfill us and give us a sense of purpose. It requires a judgment. Different people have different ideas and interests, but there are some aspects of life that are intrinsic and meaningful to all people above and beyond our own particular interests. One example is family. We are all born of two parents, a union of opposites. In all cases, there is a union of opposites that create us. It is our parents' role to guide us and instill within us their understanding of life. This is no small task. In fact, it is one of life's greatest tasks to be a parent, to be a good parent especially. Parents who fail this task are those who have not decided, or those who have not found what should be most important in their own lives. To be a good parent is to be someone who is capable, selfless, creative, and most importantly, grounded within good principles. What makes for good principles in regards to parenting? Self-development is a good place to start. By self-development, I'm not talking about selfish or superficial improvements. I am talking about knowing the proper sacrifices that are necessary in order to be the best version of oneself, which is essentially the development of virtues and integrity. To consider family as one's highest value is to also know or to learn what sacrifices must be made to align with that value. The sacrifices made by the parents ultimately speak of their character, and it is their character that creates the foundation for their principles. And it is their character that then, therefore, is passed down to the next generation. This is where virtue comes back in. I already mentioned some personality traits: capable, selfless, creative. Those traits can also all be considered virtuous because of the inherent good qualities that they produce. Virtues are imbued with moral standards, if I can't pan that in enough. They are created based on a decision of something being right. We can say that determination is a virtue, like I said before, because it has the quality of steadfastness, which means that the person who holds this virtue completes what they start. How they use this quality makes a world of difference. A person determined to raise a proper family is different from a person determined to gratify their own base desires. This is where a moral decision is made. One can say that it is right to want to raise a family because it represents the course that all life has taken before. It not only satisfies base urges, it gives people a sense of purpose and a feeling that what they're doing with their life is important. And how important it is! If not for the urge to raise a family, none of us would be alive. It is the right thing to do for many reasons, and thus embodies a sense of virtuousness. And I think there's some more I want to say this, so I didn't exactly tie it back into it being of the highest value, of family being of the highest value. Why that example is a sufficient one is because of the kind of rigorous undertaking that a person has to make in order to align themselves with that value. So, by doing so, they are essentially engaging in their own act of creation, a microcosm of creation. And if you believe in the Bible, that we were created by God, and having a family is our own way of being able to physically embody that sense of creation. So, we liken ourselves then to God by having a family and by making the sacrifices necessary to raise that family. So I think it's a really good example. There are probably other examples, but I wanted to just add that little bit extra to tie it back in, because I started by saying that you don't have to necessarily have God as your highest value if you're not religious, or if you're not, I'll say if you're not religious. You can have something like family, and you can strive to be a very good parent. And religion will help with that. The structure and the values within religions will help with that, but aren't entirely necessary. So, but I think it's one of the few examples that I can actually think of where it's the case that holding yourself to that kind of standard is acceptable. One of the few acceptable examples if you're not religious. So then we move on to vice. The opposite of virtues are vices. Vices are material conditions that hamper and limit the ability to grow and mature. Vices are bad habits whose only purpose is short-term gratification of the senses. We know vices to be a bad or improper thing. Hence why in our modern society we so desperately try to normalize our vices to avoid feeling the sense of shame and guilt that is supposed to be associated with bad behavior. I know this statement alone is a lot to get into. I didn't get into it here, and I think a lot of people would actually maybe not disagree with me, but raise their eyebrows at me because we're not supposed to feel shame or guilt anymore. But I totally disagree with that. You are supposed to feel shame and guilt for bad things, for bad behaviors. That's the point of this, and the point of this guide is to recognize what are bad behaviors by recognizing what is moral and immoral, and then to feel the appropriate amount of shame and guilt for engaging in those bad behaviors, which then propel you towards better behaviors. That's essentially the process. But again, that's a can of worms. Temptation is the path to vice. It is the initial draw towards bad behavior. It starts when a child learns that they can get away with bad behavior. It may start out as lying, little white lies. Lies that eventually turn into all-out manipulation to achieve particular goals without having to do the work themselves. Temptation exists as curiosity, and curiosity isn't a bad thing. However, a lack of knowledge for what is good and what is bad can make curiosity dangerous in many situations. A young boy who catches a glimpse of a nude woman may generate a spark of curiosity that is later acted on. Maybe not. In 1850, the only way a young boy could see a nude woman was if he peeped through a window. But now, everybody has their own personal windows, smartphones, or even their own computers. The average age that children discover pornography in America is about 11 years old. A glimpse now can turn into a full-blown porn habit very easily and very quickly. I mentioned this, but I'm not going to get terribly into it. I'm going to get more into the modern day aspects towards the end of the guide when I finish it, because I want to go through all the old stuff first, and then I'm going to add my own bits of the modern world towards the end, so we can get a better picture of how the old fits in with the new. So more on that later. But like I said, it's worth mentioning here because it's a relevant expression of temptation. And I have one more thing to add about how these definitions, and how moral decisions are made. Like I said earlier, it can be incredibly difficult to discern right from wrong because of varying circumstances for any given situation. There's some things that are more or less absolute, like murder, but many things are not. In those situations, the best thing one can do is to follow their own conscience. We do have an innate sense of what is right and what is wrong, and more specifically, what is right for us and what is wrong for us. Some people are oblivious to their own conscience. Some are mentally ill and can't properly engage with their own conscience. And others simply can't ignore their conscience. I don't know if there's an in-between where you sort of listen to it or you sort of don't. I think it's either you're aware of it or you're not aware of it. You can either use it to your advantage or you are governed by it. So, sometimes we spring into action because we know it's the necessary thing to do, even if it catches us by total surprise. When we learn that we are capable of things that we once did not know about ourselves, especially if in that context and in that moment we do something courageous, we start to realize how much is already within us if we just consult ourselves, consult our conscience. So if you allow yourself an honest question, which is very difficult, it's a very difficult thing to do, to really be honest with yourself and to get an honest, unfiltered, unbiased answer. But if you do allow yourself that honest question without the biased expectations from the ego, you will get an honest answer. And that answer is actually your conscience speaking to you and guiding you towards better decisions and towards your own development. It's unknown how the conscience actually works, or where it comes from, much like consciousness itself. But it is nonetheless an important feature of personality that strives not only for survival, but the amplification of the most harmonious conditions. The most harmonious condition essentially guarantees survival. Conscience tells us when conflict is necessary, when it is appropriate to spring to action, when it is appropriate to deny oneself for the sake of something greater, and most importantly, to steer one away from temptation. Socrates was noted for always following what his conscience told him. I believe he called it his own inner, not demon, it's the Greek word D-A-I-M-O-N, daimon. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this was said about Socrates. So it's what helped him develop his own personal philosophy, a philosophy that is still known, taught, and practiced today, thousands of years later, in search of a meaningful and enriching life. So, I wouldn't even call the work done here as the tip of the iceberg. There are so many arguments that can be made one way or the other, and so many nuances that are just left unaccounted for. But I think I have, at the very least, accomplished the goal of creating some understanding of what the author, William Simmons, means when he talks about the development of good habits, good principles, and good manners. That is part 3. Thank you so much for watching. If you stuck through, please give the video a like, share it if you feel so compelled to, leave a comment, and definitely consider checking out the full article on Substack. Actually, I think this podcast, with all the extra information that I added here, is probably a bit better than the way I wrote it. that's why I was going back and forth so much. But anyways, like I said, if you enjoy that, and if you want to support me, I have some other links if you want to check out some of my books. I would also be greatly appreciative of that. And so that's it for part 3. Part 4 is the next chapter in the book. I believe it's on obedience, and I'm going to be starting that hopefully today. So, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for sticking it through, and I'll see you next time.